Hey y'all, this is the Beyond the Dojo podcast. I'm Lauren.
I'm Jeremiah.
And today we have a special guest. This is Jeff Everett. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, Jeff.
Today we had our monthly black belt training, and Jeff taught for us, and it was really awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty cool, yeah. I like a class that takes a very simple technique and breaks it down and really gets deep into the technique and not just like step and punch, move your feet around.
Yeah.
So that was cool, man. I appreciate
It's
that.
a step and punch with figuring out how to move your feet and better and more efficiently and
Yeah.
taking a more advanced look at the breakdown
Yeah.
of movement, biomechanics.
It was nice too to hear someone talk about the topic of breathing, just because I think we know that it's part of karate, but we really don't talk about it that much. So, and it's
Yeah.
central, I think, to a lot of movement.
I think for me, I can't really say. I would say X number of years I've been focusing on this or that, but breathing has been a topic that I've been trying to refine for myself
Right.
a lot.
Yeah.
And I can't say that it's gotten more in the last 10 years or it's more and more my thoughts kind of go towards breath control, because that seems to be what regulates movement more. I mean, that's how I helped regulate what I do and how I do, and speed, things like that. So
Yeah.
control the breath, you can control the body better.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that's why I'm trying to, I've been doing this 39 years.
Yeah.
This month is the 39th anniversary since I started training.
Nice.
And I'm still very much learning things fresh.
Yeah.
Even though the techniques a lot of times are the same thing, I'm figuring out things differently.
Yeah.
So at any given time, I look back at the previous 5 years, 10 years, and it feels completely different from a period of time before that. So
Yeah.
that evolution is what kind of keeps me going and interested and motivated to just do it.
Yeah, because it gets boring just doing the same stuff over and over again, right?
Right. So I compare it to going to just general fitness classes where they got their routines to do this and that. And, those are great too for, trying to develop or get to a certain, level of exercise and cardio in our lives. But at the same time, I'm bored to death with that kind of stuff, because I don't, I'm working the muscles, working the body, but what am I learning? I don't know. I got to learn something. And that's what karate brings to me, is the ability to continue to grow and learn and change. And it's like, love it.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that have issue with physically doing something and there not being a tangible outcome. So if they're not learning something or learning a skill or, hitting somebody or whatever, then they have a hard time with the fitness portion. So I totally get that.
Yeah, I think it's awesome that you mentioned you've been training for 39 years. Who was your first karate teacher?
I started, I was 16 years old, and I started at a college dojo.
Oh, okay.
So 16 year going into a college class, that was kind of a nice little bit of an introduction, but it was just a dojo instructor at the time, and it was part of the region, north central region of the AAKF. So that was Robert Fasaro's, his region as part of the AAKF. So Robert Fasaro was really the sensei that I followed from that moment on in 1983 when I started, and then until he passed, and I think it was 2018.
Yeah.
So he's the different guy. Was the dojo instructor was my first one. His name was Marlon. I think he didn't continue training after a few years, but Robert Fasaro was kind of my inspiration, because as he got into his 60s, his 70s, and 80s, he's getting up and he's teaching, he's just moving, he's incredibly flexible and strong and powerful. That's what I want to be at 80.
Yeah.
So I'm not 80 yet or close, but that's what I look at karate training for, the longevity and just the physical nature of it that keeps me able to move and be flexible and just, I don't want to get lazy and have trouble getting off the couch. I just want to, so that's my inspiration. So there are a few people that as they get up to that age and they're still moving and training and teaching, and it's like, those are the inspirations right there.
Yeah.
You can't really look at baseball players or football players that are
have
still
that
doing it
longevity.
in their 80s.
Right.
Right.
So basically, you're a Nishiyama guy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Fasaro
So
was under Nishiyama, and
right.
you trained under Fasaro.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
what were those early years of training like?
Yeah.
Like training with Fasaro and all of that. What was that like?
Well, as I was 16 years old when I started, it was very nerve-wracking, because I'm trying to learn something, and here's this guy who's like, he was the main instructor for the region, and he just kind of had a feel to him that it was just a kind of an awe, he was that generation of instructors or senseis that we kind of, he was the pioneer for that, especially that part of the country at the time.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
So it's kind of like you're able to train under that influence and have that direct connection with him and with Nishiyama Sensei, and Fasaro Sensei actually met Funakoshi. I think it was after the Korean War.
Oh wow!
And so he's got a little bit of a story about that. It's like that is, so that's a close tie to some of the very roots that brought us this fabulous art called Shokan. So
describe training in the early '80s. We got guys on here that describe like in the '60s and '70s. What's the '80s like?
Yeah, so I remember the first day I walked into the dojo. It was basically just a college gymnasium, but there were huge classes. There were probably 30 people in the beginner class.
Nice.
And they would periodically, every quarter or semester, they would have a new beginner class starting, and there'd be 30 people, 20, 30 people, 40, however many, just huge numbers coming in.
Yeah.
They couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah.
And all the classes were just huge like that all the time. But, as the 80s went on, 90s, it kind of leveled out, and the numbers kind of dwindled to, and they're not really rebounding the way they used to be. It doesn't have the popularity, I don't think, because it's coming off of the 70s where you had Bruce Lee movies and Chuck Norris movies. They were very popular, and that just drove people into the dojos all the time.
Yeah.
But as that kind of emphasis in popular media kind of dwindled down, then I think that reflected in the dojo numbers. So, but it was a great time. I look back at those as some fun, great times of my training. And unfortunately, I was low enough in rank. I didn't know what I was doing in the first place to really enjoy it.
Yeah.
To get the most out of it. But
did you compete as a young man? Or?
I did a little bit. I wasn't motivated by competition, but periodically, tournaments pop up, and it was there. So I did it. I didn't put a lot of effort into it. So sometimes I win divisions, and sometimes I wouldn't. I've competed on the national level with the AAKF a couple times, but it just isn't what motivated me to do. So
You compete in both kata and kumite?
in the earlier years, a little bit more kumite. Otherwise, I'm more of a kata guy, I think.
Yeah.
You tend to have, I think we were talking about before, you have people who are really good at kata or really good at kumite, but very seldom do you have somebody that does both.
Right.
And with a high level. But
Yeah.
my preference, I just enjoyed doing kata more. So I tended to do just those kinds of divisions later on. So
Yeah.
So what motivated you in karate in the early years? Most of us is like, oh, I want to get a black belt. I mean, and for me, it was like competing. I just absolutely loved like going to tournaments and doing
that
kind of
match,
thing. Having that adrenaline, dude. It's just one of those things. So what was your motivation?
Well, it was 1983 when I started. So this is again coming off of the popularity of martial arts movies, and it was, so before I started training, I would watch, Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris movies and think, those are just fun, violent movies. I was not, that did not pique my interest at all. I was not at all interested in all the scenes, which basically it was different types of violence to address other violence, so it was what it seemed like. It wasn't until I kind of got onto a different television show that projected what martial arts were in a different, more philosophical light.
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh yeah, and then so I started reading about it. And
Is that the Kung Fu series?
yeah,
I was gonna say with Dragon Ball Z.
David Carradine, even though
Oh,
as an actor, he did a pretty good job, but it took away the purpose of training was not for fighting.
Right.
It was more for personal development. It's more for self-discipline, and that really caught my interest.
Awesome. That was a great show.
And then from there, I thought, oh, I love it. I want to go. So I started to kind of where I was at the time. I was living in Fargo, North Dakota, which you'd expect a fairly limited presentation of different martial arts. So I did a couple of checking, the local dojos, and I ended up going to the university, NDSU, where they had this Japanese karate class, and I saw that and walked in the first day like, yep, that's it. And then ever since, 39 years later, I'm still trying to get better at it.
Yeah. Gotcha. So you started in North Dakota.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
Fargo, North Dakota is where.
So I always assumed you were from Minnesota. Are you from Minnesota?
Well, it's right on the border of Minnesota.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Fargo, North Dakota, Moorhead, Minnesota. It's separated by a river.
Gotcha.
At the time, that's where I was living in that area, but originally from Minnesota. And spent some time in South Dakota. Moved around a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Just a bit. So have you? I know we've talked a bunch about running dojos, owning dojos. Have you ever run a dojo? Have you owned a dojo? Or
I have. After I left Minnesota, I went to where'd I go? Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma for a while. I lived there for 7 years. I did start a dojo there.
Okay.
It had a fair size. I mean, I taught through the community education or community park system, and I had some consistent classes going there of all ages, adults, some kids, and some older adults even. So. And then I eventually moved to Florida, and for a while I took a few years off of teaching and just kind of continued self-training, and then I decided to give up another attempt to build a dojo, and so I got into actually Tampa schools, Tampa Parks and Rec, and so I was teaching out of some of the stuff there. So that was pretty much limited to children, and I pretty much found there's a difference completely from teaching kids with what they want and need as a student base versus some your more serious students that want to learn for a different reason. So,
what do you find the biggest differences?
Well, kids, with their attention span, which isn't necessarily long anyway, it's more about immediate gratification. They want to be able to maybe just do a few classes and then get a belt.
Yeah.
And I know that kind of seems to be what it takes to keep their interest is that they need to have that goal, which for all of us, we need to have some goal.
Yeah.
We need to have a goal in our training. But for kids, it kind of seems a little bit more tied to the notion of changing a belt, getting a belt. It's more like a reward.
Do you feel like kids came into your dojo like thinking that, or did they see like, oh, I'm a new white belt, but they have a different colored belt? Is that kind of maybe what you think the influence was, or do you think they came in already thinking like, I want to change belts immediately? I'm just curious I'm curious of the relationship between like dojo culture influencing someone's goals versus the culture at large influencing kids as they come in.
I think it's the culture at large.
Yeah.
When they come in, they have an idea of what it is that training is.
Yeah.
And then when they find out that it's not exactly that, that what's in their mind, then their expectations change, or their motivation changes, or the joy that they get from it changes. So it became a struggle with trying to keep students satisfied, but protect the product, which is a good quality instruction. And to teach something of value. Right. Because to learn something like what we're doing, it takes a long period of time. This is not something you do for 2 weeks and I'm the greatest, or This is not even 10 years, 20 years. you're still trying to get better. I'm almost at 40 years. I'm still trying to get better. I'll say that again in 10 years, in 20 years, I'll still say that again. I'm trying to get better. That's the goal. Is to be better tomorrow than I was today.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I don't think kids can think. They're not developed enough to think in that term, in that sense, which is fine.
Yeah.
But you got to keep them satisfied and with shorter term goals that they can reach and attain, so that they can set the next goal and then the next goal, and then eventually, if they stick around, then they'll start to see this long term benefit to continue to train.
Do you have any suggestions for those goals? Like if we are trying to protect the product of what we're teaching, and yet we know that like kids are super goal oriented, what kind of goals would you suggest for like an instructor or whatever to try to keep kids' interest?
Well, the obvious ones are, yes, you got to test them.
Yeah.
So that they get a belt.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's something that they can learn in whatever amount of time to build a skill.
Yeah.
And they can demonstrate that skill. But as instructors or anybody, we'd love to see you pass. You talk to the little kid, I really hope you pass. But sometimes if you don't pass, that is not failing. There is a difference between going to school and you're learning your math question, you're doing your math questions on a test. If you don't do well enough, you fail that test. It's not the same in karate. If you don't pass your test, that's not the same as failing. That's just not advancing.
Sure. So having a different perspective.
Communicating that different thought pattern
Yeah.
is important, I think, so that their expectations are that if they don't pass, that doesn't mean anything bad about them. It's just you need a little work more in this area or that area to get that goal. And then as instructors and in teaching the examiners, as our goal as examiners, we have to be ready to not pass students. So that's the discipline on our side. It's like, I really want you to pass, but your kata wasn't quite there, or your techniques were just, we need to have a little more of this or that. So sorry you don't pass, but this isn't failing. This is what you need to do, and next time I bet you can do it. So we have to encourage them to look forward to it, and then eventually they'll get there. And I remember plenty of times, I won't say how many times, but not passing tests. And you're disappointed a little bit that you don't pass, but at the same time, I remember feeling motivated well beyond, like, wow. Almost as motivated when I didn't pass as when I did pass. So I was like, that feeling, how can I communicate that to somebody else? Who cares if I pass or not? I'm still excited to continue and try to get to that next level. It just motivates me to do more, to work harder rather than tears you down. It's like, I give up, So I think it's very difficult to communicate that. And what happens is kids will give up. But at the same time, I don't want to pass. I don't want to give an exam to a kid and then they just weren't there. And then, so you either give it to them so they feel better, or not give it to them and then they feel bad. It's like, I can't. That's another. But at the same, I want them to be motivated, but so it's a delicate approach. But I think ultimately that it's hard to balance what you need to do and what you want to do. In order to, but motivating students is a difficult job because a lot of it has to come within them. But hopefully, as instructors, we can communicate what they need to try to take from it.
And then the traditional approach, or traditional martial arts approach, where it's okay not to pass. Right, it's so countercultural nowadays. Everybody wins, everybody's passing, everybody is this, and if you're not doing that, then there's something severely wrong with you. And they can't see past that as being a learning point, but more of like a disappointment. And that's that's a shame. It really is.
Yeah, and maybe that's something else that I took out of the starting in the earlier days.
Right.
Because it was common for people not to pass. And it's not, it was common for people not to pass, but it was common for people to pass at the same time. So it's like, but there was a group that I started with, and we all just kind of moved pretty much at the same speed. Sometimes a little bit slower, sometimes others would be a little bit faster in passing. But eventually, we just kind of, if you're persistent and just don't quit, you're going to get there. But this is not a short-term goal. This is not a short-term endeavor. Karate training, if you want to do it right, you got to do this all your life. Yeah. But it's not like that means you can't do anything else. You can still do everything else.
Right.
This is
You had mentioned that you do a lot of solo training, and I think that's probably one of the hardest things to do is mature karateka who aren't part of a plug into a dojo consistently is actually training by yourself.
Right.
So give us some tidbits and advice on how to continuously do that.
Yeah. It was very difficult for a long time to just put the gi on and go out on the floor and okay, well, I'll step through his kata. Okay, now what? Let me do some drills up and down. Okay, now what? So, look at the clock. I might as well just finish up and go. Yeah. It's like I had to set a goal. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I would take, the goal might be to do X number of reps.
Yeah.
Or this many katas. So I would write it down. Here's my list. I'm going to do this kihon. I'm going to do these combos and this. X number of however many different kata. So I might have just wanted to do all the heians, and then I'll do like 3 each or 5 each, and then all the just kind of continue from there. Just make a list, do it.
Yeah.
But really, what motivated me more was since I was self-training, and after I left Minnesota and not training as routinely with Fasaro Sensei, I kind of figured out that just setting up a video camera at the dojo floor and just getting out and just doing it on video camera, I felt the same kind of like nervousness or anxiety because it's being recorded. I need to make sure that it's perfect. So I kind of felt, in a way, I tricked myself by putting a camera up and recording myself. I tricked myself into having that sensei's eye staring at me.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is really kind of cool. I can fool myself into.
Do you go back and review those videos?
So I go back and review them. Sometimes they're worth saving. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're like, delete it now. But otherwise, so I have hours of video that I've just kind of done over the years and that I saved, but it was interesting to just do that as an exercise, personal exercise to get my self-training started again.
Oh yeah.
And then so I do that, or if I can have mirrors where I can actually see some of the things that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So there's feedback. I can look over here at the mirror and see what I'm doing to make self-corrections, or I can record it where I feel like I've got that sensei's eye looking at me.
Well, it's definitely easier to see everything. Like whenever you're looking at a mirror, I feel like you can only look at like 1 or 2 things. But when you look at a video, you can see everything together. Yep. And if you can slow it down, it's even better because then you're like, wow.
Angle, and then you do it from this angle, and then you do it from that angle, and then absolutely. Yeah. So those are. That's probably the main thing that I took out of self-training that really kickstarted it to make it fun, made it motivating again. Right. And then, whenever possible, going to, visit other dojos and seminars, training seminars and things like that. But, and then, interesting. So it was helpful in that way.
Do you have any sensei that you derive inspiration from, like primarily? Is there anybody in particular that you...
Well, yeah, eventually we all kind of get to that point where the senseis that we really try to learn from and look up to, they pass. So Nishiyama Sensei passed in, I think it was 2008. And that was while I was still very much active part of the AAKF organization. And then Fasaro Sensei died, I think it was 10 years later, 2018.
Yeah.
So I don't really have any particular person that I've really kind of steered towards in that direction, but certainly down here we got Rick Houghton Sensei. He's very inspiring. He's one of those guys that just amazes me. I could watch him with my jaw. Like, how is he moving? So I'm trying to learn how to move like that.
Yeah.
He's one, and there's a few other people that I just kind of keep that image of what I remember of how they do their art. Mm-hmm. How they move it. I try to get that feeling and just keep that, and then I try to kind of as much as possible incorporate.
Yeah.
But so there's a few. Yeah.
So it was interesting because during class that you had mentioned that Rick's would describe something that actually would you'd make a connection with that you've been working on for years and just couldn't say the words or even bring it to connection. And I think after a certain point in your training, that's what teachers are. They're not really teaching you anything new. They're just reinforcing what you've been working on or what you've been thinking all along. And it's like they give you that pinpoint to connect, and then you move forward.
Because we're training, we gotta get a feeling for what we're doing, and then I don't really think to verbalize it. But then, this sensei or that sensei says something like, yeah, those are the words. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really, again, it's that kind of moment.
Yeah.
It's like he said something. Oh, it just clicks right away. Or a lot of times what happens, they'll say something. It's like, okay, and then days, weeks, whatever. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Now I get it.
Yeah.
I might be a little slow sometimes, but
yeah, I feel like later in your karate life, senseis become more coach-like. They're coaching you up, they're helping you out, they're kind of directing you a little bit, but they're not really telling you exactly how to do your karate. The correction they say they have to tell you bend your knee more. After you've been doing it for 20 years.
I think it depends on the instructor though, because there are some that their coaching approach is very specific. I think it depends on that instructor and that student. But
at that moment, they're not just saying bend your knee because you're not low enough in stance.
Right, there's a specific reason.
There's a very specific reason.
And I think one of the things that Houghton Sensei said that really clicked for me was at a certain point, there's no reason to think about technique anymore. Mm-hmm. You're beyond technique. We've been doing it so long, the technique should be there.
Right.
There's no reason to think about the technique.
Yeah.
It's more of a feel. It's more of a feeling, and so that's why, like when I'm self-training or when I'm teaching, sometimes I'm kind of steering towards this idea of kind of understanding what I'm feeling in the muscles, in the various muscle groups as I go. What does it feel like? And then just. Sometimes there are places, this leg doesn't really feel like anything. I should be doing something with, like squeezing too much of this or that. And like the feeling is off. So I'm kind of thinking less on technique, but how does the movement, the feeling, the tactile sensation of moving from one position to the next, what does that feel like? And does it feel right? Does it feel wrong? Does it feel weak? Does it feel strong?
Right.
Does it, this, that, what is it? And then just try to balance it out into my idea of what it should be.
We kind of gone back and forth on this quite a bit, like the idea of form versus movement. Like I think we've talked about how early on in your karate, it is all shapes. And maybe we think of technique as like a shape or something, but then there's also this movement portion that is not often, I think, stressed as much early on, but you may look really great in this position and then in the next position, but what are you doing in between those? And maybe that's kind of what you're getting at is like what's going on between those two different positions.
The transition from one to the next. Yeah. Transitions are just as critical as the starting or the ending position. So how you get there, it very much affects.
I think you're an excellent example of what progression in karate looks like.
Yeah.
You talked about like, am I using the right muscles? Do I feel right? Do I look right when I'm watching myself on my video? To me, that's a perfect example of how, as a karateka training for 3-4 decades, how you really train and how do you constantly move forward, you progress forward, right? I feel like some guys, after a certain time on the floor, they check out. They're just going through the movements, they're doing the movements, but they're not really concerned about how they're doing the movements, right? Or what they're feeling. And to me, that was like one of the reasons why we wanted to interview was the fact that you could tell that you're still critical of your karate. You know what I mean? Like you really still try to work on things.
More critical than
right?
anybody else maybe. But.
Right, but that's the thing. That's progression, right? Is this, you're constantly criticizing yourself saying, I'm not doing this well enough, I'm not doing this well enough. I'm constantly honing myself back and shining and polishing things. And there's things that, honestly, you do that are really great, right? And there's things that you do that you're like, I don't want to show nobody that, you know? that's just for me in the dark room, you know? And that's like, that to me is what longevity in karate starts to look like.
And the thing is, who cares?
Right.
Who cares if we're not perfect?
Right.
You know, the senseis that we all kind of looked up to over the years, definitely they're not perfect, and they have moments of doing something that was just completely wrong. You know, we're all human beings, but you know, if you do something that just isn't right or just can't quite get it, I'll keep working on it.
Yeah,
you know, it's not going to tear me down.
Well, that was very admirable today. Is like whenever you were, because this particular black belt class is not about teaching necessarily. It's about sharing ideas. So we don't have to like have it down necessarily. We're just sharing things maybe we're working on or that we think maybe other people could find value in. So you shared a couple of times, you share an idea and you're like, all right, let's see if my movements match my words, and then you show it. But I feel that way all the time. I totally know where you're coming from, because they're like, you get nervous because you're like, I know what I'm saying, but I don't know if physically like I can show it every time, and like I'm still working on it in my own karate, but I want other people to know it too, because they need to know as well. So I get where you're coming from.
Well, there's a lot that goes on in my head that feels just great.
Yeah.
That's why I get the video out. I record it. It's like, there's a Discord here. What I feel and what I'm saying are not the same thing.
Video does not lie.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But then, yes, very much true. But so that allows you to kind of make those adjustments. So if it feels great, but then I look at it, it's like, well, that's not right. That changes my thought pattern to do something different. Maybe it'll feel great next time, and then maybe this is better now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think it also, being able to be, I mean, not critical in a negative way, but being able to look at yourself with a critical eye and be able to like essentially be compassionate on yourself and be like, hey, this is not perfect, but I do want to work on it. I am seeking that perfection, and yet I can acknowledge that I'm not there yet. Like, it's great for your own development, but also from a teaching perspective, I feel like it makes it easier to be able to convey that to students. We even had this discussion. I literally had this discussion with somebody on Thursday, and I had to take her aside and be like, look, this is not personal when I give you a correction. This is to make you better. Eventually, you have to learn how to separate the two.
Yeah.
Karate teaches humility.
Oh, I love being a student.
Yeah.
To just be able to just go out there and training, and then have some, nobody's perfect, but sometimes I do things that are kind of off.
Yeah.
And if somebody can correct me on it, then that's great.
So do you have anything, taking a bird's eye view of the karate world, what is there something that you feel that is going great right now for the karate community, and is there something at large you feel like is not so great in the karate world at large?
So kind of, as I think organizations, the different governing organizations for this karate body or that karate body, in the early days there was only JKA. At some point, I think 87 or whatever year, JKA split. And then there are more splits, and there's more splits, and so you got all these sub organizations everywhere, and everybody's got to control what their product is. And I think what you're doing here, and why I really enjoy what you're doing here, is more of like, we don't need any of that political stuff. We just want to train, we just want to learn, we want to get better, without the strict controls over how much I pay for dues or pay for testing or how often or tournament this or that. So it's more free in that sense. So it's more open-minded to have this feeling rather than this organization only limited to their subset of instructors that cannot look outside that organization. So they're very limited. So I think as we move into the the coming years or the trend, maybe, I don't know if it's, I might be off on this opinion, but I like this idea better.
I'm not sure if we just surround ourselves with people that mirror our own ideas, but every time we've asked somebody that has been their answer.
Yeah. Well, this is an ever increasingly politically divided society.
Right.
And so I'm tired of all that.
Yeah.
I'm tired of instructors that say you can't go learn from this guy because he's not part of our organization. Well, okay.
Yeah.
So eventually it just kind of, I move on and we all move on and whatever.
The defiant brat in me is just like, who do you think you are that you can tell me that I can't go train with someone? I'm sorry. I still cannot fathom that. I didn't grow up that way. We were never affiliated. We were loosely affiliated with the JKA, but we were never actually an affiliated dojo. So I just can't fathom growing up. I'm from a totally different generation of people. We just didn't grow up that way.
And some are more strict in that sense than others.
Yeah.
I've had some instructors, I think even Nishiyama Sensei was more open-minded for his students to go learn from others. Mm-hmm. But on that level, of his level, there are others that were very much restrictive. So, but at the same time, I think Nishiyama's still might have been a little bit limiting in some ways too. But I mean, you're still trying to protect your product. So
I get that. Without
it being too much in the direction that you don't want it to be. So I mean, it's a little bit can get complicated, I suppose. But I'm done with that. I just want to train. Get me on the dojo. Let me have some time to work up a sweat doing something. I'll be happy.
Yeah.
Cool.
Any good things that you see right now in the karate world at large?
Well, yeah. I mean, we you put out the word. We get a few people coming in. It's like, wow, it's kind of nice to meet new people that have similar ideas or similar goals. We all have different backgrounds, but we're kind of coming together. Yeah. I guess that's probably the big thing. So other than that, we're just trying to build up, trying to, as that base of karate people, black belts, it gets older and older and older. We got to try to get more younger people involved, kids that can stay in or start as teens. I started as a teenager, and I was instantly hooked. Yeah. But I was old enough at that time where I didn't have the need of instant gratification of a test every month. Right. A new belt every month, anything like that. But so that's the difficult part of the profession, maybe. But so where we go.
That's the road. It feels good to actually hear people and see people like support our approach sometimes.
Well, there's a bunch. I think it's a bunch of separate people who are all taking that approach at the same time, and we're all finding each other.
Yeah, that's reassuring because a lot of times we're dealing with people that are part of our organization. And when you talk to them, they automatically become a recruiter. Yeah. And you're like, sorry, girl, I don't really. It's almost like saying no to someone when they ask you out. Sorry. But that's good to hear. But last thing and probably most important thing, Lauren, what are you working on?
What am I working on? Okay, so I'm working on the combo I'm working on is just the jab, front arm down block, and then Gyakuzuki step in. And so the big issue I was running into last week is whenever transitioning into the down block and then Gyakuzuki, is I was having a lot of leaning forward. So trying to get away from that. And what I did this week to work on it was rather than doing the get on brag Gyakuzuki and then stepping in, I just didn't step in. And that helped a little bit, like stopped me from feeling like I was going too fast and going forward and all of that. So I think that helped a little bit with, not leaning and stuff. So yeah, we got all work
for me, it's the same drill. We train together a lot, so we're on the floor.
Do?
We're on the floor all the time together. So it's one of those things where we can bounce ideas off each other. It's kind of funny because in your perspective and your breakdown, you're talking about controlling your center, keeping your body upright. And for me, it's the footwork, like trying to get the feet to do what I want them to do.
Well, I'm working on that too.
And that's what I focused on this week was, a little bit less of a Yoriyashi, a little bit more of a trying to get the timing of the shift back, step forward kind of thing, that switching of weight and push and drive like you were talking, the switching the rolls of your feet when you want them to switch, not when you just happen to move through that space, is such a unique thing. It's such a it's like next level control.
Yeah.
So that's us. And then Jeffrey, what are you working on, buddy?
Well, as we worked out today, talking a lot about breathing, timing, body timing, biomechanics. I'm trying to, constantly. It's not like I'm working on it new, but just kind of applying breath control more to my kata. So I'm focusing on Sochin. Because it's kind of a nice blend of slow, movements, building up strength movements, breathing, and then some sharp, quick movements. So just kind of probably applying that thought more specifically to my kata. So.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That definitely is a long-term thing to work on.
Well, been doing this for 39 years. If I can make another 40 out of it, that'll be...
There you go.
Sochin kills my butt, man. After I'm done with Sochin, I'm like, bro, my lower back and butt cheeks are just done.
Flugeldash is so difficult to me.
Too.
It's such a weirdly abstract stance because it's not really a horse stance and it's not really a front stance. It's some weird some weird combination of the two. I don't like it.
Well,
I didn't say I didn't like it. I just said it works me it works me pretty good.
The old phrase "no pain, no gain"
No.
works if you're muscle pain
because
you're working
pain.
muscles. That's good.
Yeah.
If it's back pain because you're tweaking something wrong, that's not good.
Right.
So after any workout, if your muscles are sore,
good.
Yeah.
Good
you got gain from that pain.
Straight up.
Yes. Awesome.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you,
We
Jeff.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye, guys. Woo.